Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Let's Do Lunch. This is our 93rd episode of the show, and we have a fantastic group on today. As you may recall, and I'm sure some of you attended our Psychology of the Subscriber session several weeks ago, this is part two, and I'll be introducing our folks in just a moment. Before I do that, let me remind everybody that our chat open and we welcome introductions, so please introduce yourself in the chat. When you do so, you're welcome to drop in your LinkedIn or say a little bit about yourself, what you're working on. When you do that, also make sure to change the drop down from just panelists to panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your posts in the chat. Also, if you have questions for the panel, please put them in the Q&A area, which is just to the left of the chat on the bottom nav, so that all of our panelists can see your questions. Let me invite our good friend, our colleague, Colin Dixon from nScreenMedia. Colin, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Ned, and I'm really looking forward to this morning's session.
Well, tell us what we have on tap.
Well, as you said, this is a part two of the Psychology of the Consumer series that we're doing in partnership with Singula Decisions. And today we're going to be talking about growth. And if you missed the first part, that is still available. You can go watch that on Digital Media Wire's channel on YouTube, or you can actually just come to Digital Media Wire and find it right there in the library. So yes, part two of the Psychology of the Consumer, Ned.
Fantastic. Have a great show.
Thank you very much. So I would like to invite Bhavesh Vagalia, who is CEO of Singula Decisions, Jennifer Whitaker, qualitative researcher and a director of quality projects. I always have difficulty with that word qualitative, Jennifer. I just stumbled over it again. And Katerina Witkins, who's a business psychologist and a researcher. So we have all the big guns for you this morning to discuss the second part of this, which is growth. Now, let's start with you, Bhavesh. I think people maybe have forgotten who Singula is, so maybe you can just give us a thumbprint of who Singula is. And we talked about acquisition before. We're talking about growth today, so maybe you can just remind people of the stages of the relationship between a subscriber, a customer, and a video service.
Yeah, no problem, Colin. Nice to be here again for part two. So, us at Singula Decisions, we've been helping subscription brands, particularly pay TV, OTT services, for the last 20 plus years, really helping them find and execute their perfect growth strategies. So all about how do you get customers to sign up to your service, how do you keep them loyal, how do you reduce churn, and there's fundamentally three kind of areas that we look at. So the first thing we try and help our clients do is we help them understand where their subscribers are along the customer journey, the subscriber journey. The next thing we then try and do, in terms of using data and insights, to really understand the context. So how did the customer end up at that stage, and where they're going, what's their trajectory? And it's only once you have those two elements, can you then really determine, what can you do to change that customer's behavior, whether you're trying to reduce churn or grow ARPUs or get them to sign up in the first place. So one of the things that we try to explore, we've been helping customers for years doing this customer journey approach and using data, but I want to take a slightly deeper look at the emotional and psychological triggers. What happens to us as consumers when we go through those different stages in the customer journey? And is there something we as operators and brands can do to learn from that emotional trigger that helps us build a better relationship with our subscribers? So I talked about, first of all, about understanding the customer journey. So we have our own framework, which we call decision moments, which are effectively 8 stages to how a subscriber interacts with a subscription service. So in part one, we talked about the join, trial, and consume. So join is, when you first sign up to a service. Trial is when, most subscription services will offer some sort of a free trial potentially. And then consume is when you've got everybody in the state, they've signed up and they're ready to consume. The next one is all around build, upgrade, and downgrade. So this is what I would say the missing piece, right? Most operators focus on acquisition or focus on churn, once a customer's signed up, it's that kind of, you're not quite sure what to do with that customer during that period. And that's what part 2 is all about, growth. And then the next part in terms of part 3 is all about the churn process. So what happens when a customer actually decides to leave your service, and then how can you win them back? So really today is all about that middle piece. I've got you signed up, you're committed, to this service. Now, what do I do about it? How do I keep you retained as long as possible? So it's all about build, upgrade, and downgrade.
Very good. So let's get the discussion going. I want to talk about first, let's talk about the relationship how did the relationship that developed when signing up for a service, how that relationship can become a little bit annoying and maybe very annoying after somebody has become a subscriber. And I want to turn to Jennifer. Why don't we turn first to you, and then you can bring in Katarina.
Yeah, so what happens around this stage of where money is concerned is that money matters kind of trigger a power struggle with brands, between subscribers and brands. And that's because when money comes up for any of us, we're triggered into these kind of reactive, defensive states of mind that affect our relationships. So the subscriber is no longer in awe and excited about the brand, they're thinking about the money they're spending. So they're getting a bit defensive, and the brand, is becoming a bit kind of authoritarian because they're expecting money to be paid. And I guess the reason we go into these kind of defensive states is that we have no control over money. And I guess that's rooted in childhood. We're kind of taught, we're not taught how to manage money. We're not taught that we have control over money. And therefore it's easy to be triggered. It's a bit like religion, you could say. And we also carry unconscious beliefs with us around money from childhood that we keep with us, and that's why we react and we get defensive. So problems therefore start to happen between subscribers and brands there. Yeah. And the brand doesn't help by taking on that kind of authoritarian parent role where it knows best, and the subscriber's kind of thinking, how do I manage this? The subscriber's not confident managing that kind of relationship.
So this is, Katarina, this is really setting up some sort of power struggle between the two, right?
Yeah, it does. And we need to understand what money means. Or remind ourselves, money is literally our currency for survival. So we buy, our food with that so we can live. We pay for our rent for this, etc. So it has a huge importance for us. And hence, when it's being taken away from us, we feel really scared on an unconscious level. Because our survival is somehow impacted, especially when we spend it on luxury goods and not just survival aspects. And another thing that's really important to remember is that humans have a bias that's called loss aversion. So we are much more prone to react when we lose something rather than when we gain something. So obviously when we're signed up with OTT brands or pay TV and money is taken away from our accounts for the subscription, we're losing money. And hence it's felt a lot more intensely, even if subscribers would put £10 bucks on our accounts, we wouldn't appreciate it as much as not losing money from our accounts. So that's kind of where we get these heavy reactions. And where the power struggle starts between the brands and the subscribers, because as Jennifer said, when we are in this relationship now for some time and we become dissatisfied potentially, that's when our focus becomes a little bit more and we think about, do we want to spend this, and is that really worth it?
Yeah. You said something really interesting there. You said about a transition from how an SVOD service really transitions to becoming a core necessity, and that's something quite different, because up until now SVOD services haven't really been thought about by people that way, have they?
Yeah, I think that's probably the times that we live in with COVID, and many of us still kind of need to be more at home, etc. And especially during the peak of the pandemic, but the peak is coming back in many countries as well. It's this having more time at home, potentially needing to homeschool, etc., etc. So OTT brands have really taken that position of, I can help you with this. I can help you with the necessity here to keep sane, if you like, or to satisfy some of your needs that previously, when you were able to go out more, could meet with other things, such as, you know, meeting friends, going to the bars and pubs and doing sports, etc. So that's where the transition happened for OTT brands in their positioning in people's lives.
Right. So, Bhavesh, talk to us about this transition from this luxury to a necessity, and how that can lead to people revisiting how much they're paying.
Yeah, I mean, I found this pretty fascinating when, when we first got the research through the whole idea from going from luxury, to necessity, and that, it's quite similar to, I guess, we talk a lot about the engagement with the subscriber, almost like a dating scenario. And I found it pretty interesting when we think about, once you've gone from a trial and you're going to consumer, you're actually committing, and then all the things that you thought were fantastic about this person start to grate on you, start to annoy you, start to kind of play on you. They've kind of lost their sheen a little bit. It's not as great as it once was, and you start thinking about whether you want to be with this person long term or not. And I think that actually happens when you think about the OTT services that we're signed up to. The idea of, do I really want to continue to sign up to the service? Is it giving me the same level of satisfaction or excitement that I first had when I first signed up? And as you move to a certain degree from luxury to necessity, you're asking yourself those questions as well. You're asking yourself, do I really want to continue with the service? So I think it's quite an interesting shift that's going on with the mindset of the consumer, as well as that kind of whole power struggle between the brand and the consumer as well.
Right. So Jennifer and Katerina, this shift from luxury to necessity, and then this tug of war that starts happening with people's budgets, it has a very unhealthy result, right? We end up with feelings of guilt. Jennifer?
Yeah. Well, especially in these times when the economy is so uncertain, when lots of things are going on politically, when people have lost their jobs, people have been furloughed, they're not sure if they're going back to work. There's a lot of uncertainty in the economy. So that, if you're spending money, if you're in a family, for example, especially if you're thinking about millennials and Gen X subscribers, who often, have a family to think of, they're going to feel a lot more guilty spending money on what could be perceived as a luxury or something just for them, if their families or their partners aren't using it as well. Or, more importantly, if there's other things to spend that money on, such as education, children, so many things that you could spend your money on apart from subscriptions. So there is a sense of guilt that's there. That doesn't mean, however, that they're not going to do it, because sometimes, the kind of inner rebel in all of us wants to have a guilty pleasure. If you think about being at the supermarket till and seeing that massive packet of crisps and a bottle of wine that you think you shouldn't buy, you obviously are going to do it because you want to treat yourself. So there's the constant kind of, I suppose, doubt in subscribers' minds if they're struggling to pay every month this.
Yeah, but it seems to me like it's a very different sort of guilt when it's a guilty pleasure and it's a luxury that you're treating yourself to. That's one thing. But when you feel guilty and it's become a necessity, that's pretty different, right, Katerina?
Yeah, it is, and I think what we've probably seen or potentially experienced ourselves during the lockdowns as well is that we started to watch, or consumers started to watch a lot more than potentially usually, and the problem with that is we start to feel guilty when we overindulge, or when we start watching other people's lives, in that sense, the scripts of other people's lives, and not creating our own anymore. We simply become spectators. And that's where guilt starts to arise as well. I'm not doing something with my life anymore. I'm just watching. So that's what needs to be is the responsibility of the spectator to a degree, but maybe there's a question for the brands. Is there something they can do for the behavior of subscribers not to fall into this overindulgence or viewing becoming a habit, and not, when watching something, it's not a pleasure anymore, but I'm just watching for watching's sake. And that's when the associations now shift between the exciting bit that we said in the, saw in the beginning, and now in the growth state, it's maybe, well, actually, they push the brand away because it's, they have this feeling of guilt, and that's very dangerous, and that's when it can start to drip.
Really impact. Yeah, well, I can tell you, I think I felt that guilt this weekend with I was watching, ended up watching the cycling on YouTube, and that felt like a big waste of time, I have to say. So Bhavesh, what can we do to diffuse these feelings of guilt? What can SVOD providers do to diffuse the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we talk about just particularly the bill moment itself, it's not just this research. We've been doing research for many years, and friction around the billing point tends to be in the top three reasons why people churn, why they get frustrated and they get annoyed, and consumers feel, I mean, to be honest with you, they have a perception, whether that's true or not, and that's, perception is reality in many ways. They're very wary of brands just hiking up prices, and they're very concerned about those kind of areas. So that's an inbuilt fear that we have. So to me, there's a couple of very straightforward things that you can do, which are, you can see a lot of brands doing, certainly do more so now than they were doing before. And certainly the OTT brands are better at it than certainly the more traditional pay TV. And that's just give transparency. Allow me to log in, allow me to view my previous bills, allow me to have a very clear view on what the costs are for my purchases. What happens if I move to the next package? What's going to impact on my, on my monthly fee? Can I opt out? Can I cancel? What can I do? And, cancellation, when we talked in part 3, most brands never want you to cancel. So they make it incredibly difficult for you to go. And the point is, how do you make it as simple as possible and seamless as possible? So I think this really is about trying to give the consumer the control back in terms of managing their monthly outgoings across their portfolio of services that they have. And if they know that they have the ability to switch you off on a month-by-month basis, they feel better. We all feel better. I mean, I've been very impressed with one of the brands in the UK. So BT, as in British Telecom, since the start of the year, they launched BT TV, or relaunched BT TV, and it's fascinating how they make a play of the fact that you as consumers can sign up, and every single month you go onto your account and you just slide on and off the things that you want for the following month. So I could say, I don't want to watch Sky Sports this month. I don't want to watch Netflix this month. I'm going to watch Amazon Prime. And you just flip the switch and off you go. And I think that's a fascinating approach towards giving that control back to the consumer. I think that's what it's all about. It's about having that two-way relationship and really taking away some of that anxiety around finances by giving you the control as a consumer to make the decisions you want to make around the amount of money you want to spend on a monthly basis.
Yeah. So great questions are coming in. Ron Neidham, thank you, Ron. That's a great question. I promise you we'll get to that. And if you have other questions, please enter them in the Q&A window. I just want to follow up on that point with Jennifer and Katerina. I can imagine that this conversation inside of an SVOD provider is very tough, right? Because on the one hand, they've got revenue coming in that from people that possibly might have cancelled but had difficulty and gave up, and it's only $7 a month, I'll figure it out later. But on the other hand, they're storing up problems for themselves, right? If they don't react.
Yeah.
Jennifer, okay, Katerina, go ahead.
Basically creating frustrations, and as a brand you want to avoid fueling negative emotions by your own behavior, i.e. the way Bhavesh was describing. You make it difficult to find where you can downgrade or where you can stop something or change something, or understanding the new billing information, the pricing structure, etc. So this all can be avoided, exactly like Bhavesh said, by simply taking these barriers away, creating transparency and giving control that serves the need of the consumer to have control and to be seen as an equal, talking about the narcissist who is just about himself and his own advantage, which is basically the behavior that brands who behave that way and making it difficult for consumers is the narcissistic trait.
Yeah, yeah. So they don't only have the option to cancel, right? Sometimes they can upgrade, sometimes they can downgrade, but upgrade, well, that's good. It sounds like it should be good for everybody. It isn't necessarily good for everybody. And a downgrade sounds like it could be bad for the SVOD provider, but might not necessarily, right, Bhavesh?
Yeah, I think this is, again, a fascinating set of levers that an OTT service or an operator can pull. And you're very right. I mean, when we talk to operators, the notion of upgrading my customer is great for lifetime value, right? You're driving more revenue from your customer base, and that's seen as positive. Now, when you think about downgrade, the operator thinks of it as a negative. I'm getting less money for my service, and that's a bad thing. The reality is this, right? So, as a consumer, you want, again, the flexibility of being able to upgrade and downgrade as you wish, depending on your personal circumstances. But sometimes the necessity to upgrade could be seen as a negative. Absolutely. I mean, I would just point to one of the examples just recently, right? So Disney Plus, you're a Disney Plus subscriber, but yet you have to pay $20 or £20 in the UK to watch Mulan, right? As a new blockbuster movie. That is, while it's a positive for people who are fans, if as a subscriber, and I'm a subscriber and I know others are subscribers, and I can tell you that it's been a polar effect. Some customers are saying, well, hold on a second, I'm already subscribing to you. Why am I paying an extra 20 quid to watch one movie? Now, we all understand the reasons why, but in that context, it's almost forcing me. And that gives me a negative view. Oh man, I want to watch the movie, I'm going to have to pay £20 to do it, on top of my subscription, which has that kind of negative connotation to it. I mean, the flip side of that is, if I'm consuming lots and you can entice me to pay more, then great, but you also got to make me feel like I'm special. You got to feel like I'm part of a special club. I'm paying extra for your service. But the balance there is not making your other subscribers feel worse. And that's a real challenge, right? How do you keep your upgraders happy while making sure your subscribers, on your base package are happy? I mean, we all know, right? One of the worst things as consumers that really angers you is when your service provider provides a better offer for new subscribers than they currently do to yourself. And you've been a loyal subscriber for many, many years. And we all know why they do it, but the reality is the kind of emotion that drives as a result of that. So, and then if we move into downgrade, I mean, the downgrade thing is, I've always been a firm believer of this. If you are proactive with an operator to a customer, you get lots of positive loyalty as a result of engaging with your customer proactively and say, hey, by the way, you're not watching that, let me downgrade you, as opposed to the customer making that decision themselves. So this really is a minefield, actually, for the operator. How do they balance all of those challenges as they try and effectively keep the customer happy for as long a period as they can?
Indeed. So what's going on here, Jennifer and Katerina? This sounds like a whole bunch of contradictions going on here. I know I personally, I've talked to several people who had exactly the reaction that Bhavesh said with the Disney Mulan experience. Other people seemed happy enough to pay it. So how does the service provider navigate this? Tell us what's going on here. Jennifer.
I guess it's about transparency, isn't it? About knowing what you have signed up to, what's the package you're going to get. So if you're signing up to Disney Plus and it's all kind of you know, these amazing things that you're signing up to and that you're going to see and be a part of, and then you're told actually for this thing you have to pay more, but you're told later on, and not in the beginning, that there'll be certain things that you're not going to get access to, then that's, you know, that's a bit annoying. It's a bit like, you know, signing up to a sports subscription and then being told that for these matches you have to go to Amazon Prime, or for this you have to go here. It's the lack of transparency really with all of it, because it's a bit like dangling carrots. You know, it's a bit like, come in, I've got everything that you need, and actually I don't, because you're going to have to part with a bit more money. And I guess it's playing on that kind of fear of missing out as well, that a lot of subscribers, particularly younger, but not always. I mean, sports subscribers, there's a lot of that, the kind of FOMO, fear of missing out on something, that they're kind of playing on to bring you in. But I guess the problem there is that when you experience that in yourself, when you're worried about missing out, and then you part with money because you desperately want to see this game or this movie or whatever it is, you're making a decision that's not rational, and later on you're possibly going to regret it, particularly if you're signing up, you know, for a 6-month kind of upgrade or something like that. So it does become like a great foundation for a relationship.
Yeah, I just saw Yifan Zhang says he immediately unsubscribed to Disney Plus, but he saw he had to pay extra for Mulan. That's a pretty, that's maybe an extreme reaction, or maybe not, Katerina. What do you think?
Well, it is like Jenny said, we are ultimately emotional decision makers, and in that moment, it's depending on what we are seeking for, it can then be experienced as a frustration that we don't have access because of the lack of transparency, and that is literally where, you know, it feeds the ground for a not so nice relationship after that. But upgrade can also be because people are excited to get access to more. Comes back again to Jenny's point about that the brands are really transparent about what the customers get with an access, and not maybe access to one movie, but what is the package of an upgrade. And if they have been happy till that point, it can be a positive thing when they upgrade.
Yeah, so I noticed that when Hulu increased the price of their live TV package by quite a lot, I think it was a $10 increase, in the email they sent to us as subscribers, they actually encouraged subscribers, hey, drop live if you're not using it right now. You've still got all of this other stuff, and then you can resubscribe to live later when there's something that you need from live TV. It sounds, I see Jennifer nodding enthusiastically. That sounds like the right approach, right?
It does sound like the right approach, and I imagine, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not, I don't have Hulu, but I imagine that they also put some kind of link in that email that showed you how to do that. And one of the problems with a lot of subscriptions is, I mean, I think most of the people listening now, if you went onto your subscription, any subscription that you have, and try to find within 1 minute the way to upgrade, the way to downgrade, the way to cancel.
Oh, it's awful. Yeah.
It would be quite difficult. Yeah,
yes.
And not a direct route either, and not very clear. So it sounds like they took the right approach with the email.
Yeah. So Bhavesh, that's definitely one of the solutions then, right? Transparency, making it easy, proactive communication, critical, right?
Oh, completely. I think, you know, as we said before, I mean, to be honest with you, all about control, you know, making it very easy, transparent. So that's actually can be applied to every single stage of the customer journey, not just these, but particularly these. That makes a huge, huge difference, because this is where, you know, us as consumers want to interact with the service. And we've talked about in part one how brands seem to kind of disappear at this stage. This is a bit where the, you know, where the rubber hits the road, really. That's where the relationships are built. They're either torn down or they're actually built during this period. So it's critical for transparency. But, you know, it's things like, I'm sure we've all done this, right? I mean, when we've tried to cancel, you dread to have to pick up the phone and speak to somebody, right? You dread it.
Yep.
You absolutely dread it, because they're going to give you that hard sell in order for you to stay. Now, I guess less so in OTT brands, but it's definitely a lot more in the more traditional pay TV world. And, you know, the whole idea of not overselling, not pushing people to stay, giving them those options, but getting all the control back to the consumer, you know, and I do think that proactivity in helping the customer, exactly what you described with Hulu, sending an email or talking to your customers and saying, look, you're not using this service as much as we'd like to use you. We'd like you to use the service, so we recommend we downgrade you. All you have to do is press this button or click this link and do this. And actually, that proactivity makes me feel as a consumer like you actually care. Makes me feel that, do you know what, you are paying attention to what I am trying to do, and therefore, conversely, you end up with a more loyal customer than you would the other way around. And that's really the trick. The trick is how you, play your brand values. I mean, each service, each brand service, or in this case, OTT or any type of service, really has their own brand, their own values that really positions themselves in the market. And you really want to be able to make sure you play to those. There's no point saying you are a brand that listens and caring when you make it really hard for somebody to cancel when they want to. Those things, they don't work. So the reality is having that consistency throughout the entire journey.
So it sounds like there needs to be a really fundamental mind shift in the way SVOD providers think about their business and think about their customers, right? Because normally, we have these edicts passed down in stone from the provider on how we can do billing, how much we pay, and all the rest. And it sounds like we really need to shift that approach to customers on a very fundamental level. I mean, I think that's the theme I sort of heard throughout today, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. I mean, look, we've seen it in all types of other industries, right? When you see, banks first being digitized, or retailers, mobile telcos, you've seen it in every other industry. When the hyper competition grows, the demand for the consumer wallet increases, and the control goes back onto the consumer. It's in those situations where those brands have to be seen, as a credible, caring type of organization that helps their customers, and that's the thing that flips them into being an actual loyal customer. One of the things that I found really fascinating with the research, I'm not a psychologist, and I've learned a lot through this process, and I found the whole idea of, I started to read, and I'm talking about a masculine versus a feminine type of approach, and I thought it was all about male and female, but actually it's not. Nothing to do with that whatsoever. It's more about the different types of energy. The masculine energy is all about acting, moving, confidence, that kind of thing. Whereas when you're looking at feminine, it's all about being connected, and it's all about listening, caring, and nurturing. And it made me think. I was on it just happened to be this afternoon actually. I was on a call with a car insurance provider. It's got nothing to do with OTT, but it was fascinating. And the way, my first time I had to deal with this insurance company, I bought a car for my daughter who's learning to drive. God help us all, but she's learning to drive. And I had to go and call this insurance company up. And honestly, the way the woman handled it made me feel like it was all my fault. I was stupid. I didn't understand. And it just made me feel really negative about the brand. And it's the first time I'd ever interacted with them. So, I think we've seen it in every single walk of life. And that whole, the thing about this part of the customer journey in particular, it's when you first really truly interact with the brand, potentially even in a human element. It doesn't matter if it's digital, whether it's through, a digital means or not. And it's really, that's when all your promises as a brand have to be portrayed, and you have to respond in the right way. So I think the whole idea of customer experience is a critical piece across the whole journey, but in particular in this middle bit where you're trying to grow that customer and keep them loyal for much longer.
Yeah, that's one of the points interesting that Philip Luff made in one of his questions, which we'll get to in just a moment. So Jennifer, Katerina, we have to get inside, we get in touch with our feminine side. Is that what we have to do for our SVOD providers?
I guess it's about balance, really. It's about, as Bhavesh said, it's important to underline that it's not about gender. It's about the inner masculine, inner feminine, which is really the energies we have in us of giving and receiving, of kind of heart and mind, thinking, feeling. You can compare it in various different ways. But what it means is kind of having more of that feminine quality, more of the yin energy is about listening, it's about empathizing, it's about nurturing relationships. Because technology brands generally have the masculine down. Basically, they are doing things in the world, they're changing things, they're creating, their energy is there, but they're lacking the other side, and therefore they're not balanced, and therefore it's hard to relate to them as kind of balanced organizations. Whereas if they injected a bit more of the other energy, the more receptive energy, they would come across as wiser, deeper, more empathic, etc. It's a bit like, if you think of earlier, a good example of this, if you think about the Dove Real Woman campaign, it has ample amounts of masculine energy. It's a big campaign. It kind of went, nationwide and probably international, I'm not sure. But it was a big campaign. It was very loud. It was very vibrant. Loads of adverts about it. Different products produced because of it. But also, it was based on listening to consume. What were their issues? What were women really fearful about? What were they worried about? What did they need to be heard? So that's a good example of a brand that really combined those two qualities. Whereas technology brands are very, very masculine focused. They're very they're doers, but they're not listeners at the moment, unfortunately. Which is why we all dread having to call one of them.
I can tell you that I've been monitoring the chat, some of the chats flying by, and there are some horror stories. You're not the only one, Bhavesh. There's lots of people out there complaining. Katerina, any last thoughts here on this? Getting in touch with your feminine side?
No, I think Jennifer said everything. I think that's why we use the analogy of a relationship, because everyone can relate to that on a personal level as well. If your partner never listens to you, if he constantly just talks about how great he or she is, if they don't show any sort of interest in you, ask questions, what your preferences are, what you like, how would you feel? And hence the analogy of many OTT brands being narcissists.
Indeed. So, Bhavesh, this has been a great discussion. Any summarizing thoughts here for us on how we manage this growth phase and diffuse all of these negative feelings that we're engendering?
Yeah, I think it's the consistent theme is about knowing when to listen and knowing when to act. I think that's what it comes down to. It's trying to understand your customers better. And I've been in meetings with major operators who are almost scared to interact with their customer in this stage, because their fear is they don't want to wake them up. They don't want to wake up their base, because they are fearful that if they communicate and wake up the base will leave, right? That constant fear is probably not the approach you want to take. You want to be much more proactive in the way you interact. And look, don't get me wrong, I can see changes in the way operators are thinking. You've seen Netflix, suggesting that you can, watch content for free now before you decide to kind of sign up. So, I can see pockets of brands around the world trying different things, but ultimately, to me, it's about building that relationship, and relationships are built when you listen and when you react, and that's what it comes down to.
I just love that, knowing when to listen and knowing when to act. It seems like it sounds simple, but I guess it's a really difficult balancing act.
Yeah, look, it's not easy, right? When you've got millions of subscribers, you can't, as a marketer, everybody wants to have that one-to-one personalized relationship, and it's very hard.
Yep.
In fact, almost impossible to do that, right? So you end up doing it, in 1-2 segments or those kind of things, and that's where demographics and all those things come into play. Data has a huge part to play in helping you do this. But then there's other challenges with data, which is I've got too much of it. How do I make sense of it? My infrastructure is not built correctly. I can't react in real time. So there's lots of things that brands can do in order to change that. But, it is a very difficult task, difficult balancing act. And for me, it's always down to being true to your brand and your values. And I can't think of some of the brands that are around in the marketplace I don't even know what they stand for. I don't know what their values are.
Yeah.
You know, and that's important. I think you'll see that transition in the coming years as these brands starting to have to build a brand beyond just their content, you know, and that's going to be a critical changing factor in this market.
Right, right. Okay, so we have a bunch of great questions. I've been monitoring them as we've been going along. So Laura, can we put up our poll so that people can be answering the poll questions while we discuss the questions that have been put in front of us? And I think, Bhavesh, didn't you want to make an offer to our audience?
Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me, Colin. So yeah, I mean, we mentioned right at the start, you asked me about the customer journey. So, you know, when we're interacting with operators, one of the first things we do is we explore their service through the lens of our decision moments. So the 8 stages that we've talked about, and these in the particular 3 that we've been talking about today. So we conduct these workshops where we're focusing down on trying to understand, helping the operator understand how their consumers go through those journeys, and therefore finding opportunities where the brand can react in a more positive fashion. So what we were thinking of doing is for people that have signed up and actually on the webinar right now, then we'd like to offer 3 free workshops. For the first 3 subscription brands that actually communicate to us, we'll happily do a workshop with you guys to delve into some of these particular areas and try and give you some recommendations that you can utilize in your organization. So I think the details will be put in the chat, but feel free to email me. My email address is bvagala@singulardecisions.com, and we'll try and help you out. We'll do some 2 or 3 key workshops.
Yep. And Helen, if you could also put a link to the white paper on your website that was the backbone of the discussion today. And now let's jump into some of the questions. I'm going to start with Miriam Koch. She asked the question, which I love. Do you feel that the consumer's desire for transparency and what they're getting with their subscription has been a reaction to the years of companies adding surcharges and other fees? In other words, people are feeling hoodwinked. Jennifer, Katerina, what do you think? Jennifer, let's start with you.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a big part of it, because people are kind of used to having negative experiences, and therefore, yeah, that's part of the I suppose natural reaction to want things to be clearer. But also, in addition to that, the fact that technology is always moving. It moves so fast. Sometimes you just want something that kind of grounds you. You want to know what you're doing, and therefore that's another reason for things to be clear, because things change so quickly.
Yeah, Katerina, people are being hoodwinked.
Well, I think transparency is a general expression for our need to have some sort of control, which is a very common human need in all of us, and some more than in others. But basically, when we get transparency from brands, we get a feeling that A, they're trustworthy, and B, we have some sort of control. So it's not necessarily only a reaction to brands' past behavior, but it's a general good practice for any brand to do, because you're serving a human need.
Very good, very good. So I want to move to actually a question that just came in from Birkmark City. He asks, very curious what the panelists believe the biggest differences between the SVOD providers' perception of their offering and how the actual viewer subscribers see the service. The difference between those two, I got a feeling that there is a large one. What do we think, Jennifer?
I mean, I guess that's why we use the analogy of the narcissist, that it's a bit like sometimes being in bed with a narcissist, because the brand is kind of shouting about itself, the service is shouting about itself and thinks it's amazing, and it is amazing. That's why we're attracted to narcissists, because they're so enthralling and exciting and great to be around. But then it's the treatment after that affects the relationship. So yes, the brand is great, and the content is, well, it's not always great, but it is often great. But there's something else missing, kind of in between that, if that makes sense.
Indeed. So we'll do one more question and then we'll go to the poll results. This one I think is probably for you, Bhavesh. Philip Luff asks, what do you think is the key customer metric, customer lifetime value, cost per acquisition, retention, churn, total sub numbers? Which one's the most important, or are they all important?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think it depends on the mindset of the service provider. I mean, we see a whole variation of that. I mean, we see some customers care specifically about churn numbers. Some care a lot about acquisition. If you're a sole OTT provider, then you would be thinking about acquisition, and that's where most people start. Actually, we care about the amount of customers we sign up, and then they forget completely about the other side of it. Is how am I going to keep them? That's another big challenge. If you are a pay TV organization, say for example a telco that has an OTT service as well, to them, the amount of revenue they're generating from their OTT service is minuscule in comparison to what they're doing on their main subscription services, whether that be mobile or the quad play or specifically on cable or satellite. Although, it is eroding, but it's not eroding to the level that's causing them that dramatic pain at this stage. In that situation, it's almost they pay lip service to the actual numbers, not really that bothered about it. So I think it varies. I mean, for me, one of the biggest measures is lifetime value for me. I think if you're able to keep a customer happy and loyal for a longer period of time, it doesn't really matter how many you acquire or how many you're churning. If you're keeping them longer, that's a good thing. You're doing something well if you're keeping the customer. I mean, one of the things that we see is the average time of OTT subscriber for a entertainment service is 3 months. I mean, that's just insane, 3 months, and you've got to try and, if you're able to turn that to 6, 9, 12 months, then that shows you're doing something right beyond just content. So my personal view is it's a lifetime value. That's the thing that demonstrates the quality of the brand that you are.
Yeah. I noticed some data this morning from Parks saying that Netflix is leading in that category as well. 50 months, they said, the average lifetime value of a customer was, which is pretty amazing. Well, I think we should take a quick look at the poll results. So Laura, can you give us the results? So let's take a look and see what people had to say. I asked, do you consider one or more of your SVOD services as a necessity in the same way as we used to think of cable as a necessity? And it looks, oh my gosh, it looks like, I'm looking at that, it's over 80% say yes, at least one. So I think that's, that really goes to prove that that they have moved from luxuries to necessities, right? Right, Bhavesh?
Oh, absolutely. And it'd be really interesting to see which brands that they consider as necessity. I mean, just by what you've described with the Netflix numbers, people talk about Netflix as a part of their life, right? So you can always imagine that most of those people have Netflix first, and then it's something on top of that. So, they've done a tremendous job, haven't they, really becoming that brand?
They certainly have. My second question, have you ever cancelled or downgraded a TV service due to frustration or anger with the provider? And looks like 3/4 of people have done that. We are not alone. How interesting. So I guess this really goes along with what you were saying, Jennifer and Katharina, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And finally, how much do you agree with the following statement? I will not add another pay TV service without dropping one I already have. Wow. Well, it's about 50-50. So some 50% say yes, they would drop one first, and 50% say they would not. So it looks like, it looks to me like there's room for growth in the industry yet. Yeah, right, Bhavesh?
Oh, absolutely. And, what I find fascinating about number 2, by the way, Colin, is, the whole industry thinks you just put the right content and the customer will be happy.
Yeah.
You hear about content is king, service is queen, and all those things that are buzzwords. That, as a statement and numbers, proves to everybody that you need to think more than just content in order to keep your customer happy.
You certainly do.
And I think also that downgrading is not necessarily a bad thing. It's, they're still with you. They don't want to leave completely. I think that's what brands sometimes misunderstand.
Yeah. Well, I think I love that thought, knowing when to listen and knowing when to act. But we certainly heard that in spades today. Bhavesh, Jennifer, Katharina, thank you for joining us again. And I have good news for everybody. We have set the date for the 3rd and final episode. which is all about churn and winning people back and stopping them from leaving in the first place. And that's taking place on the October 19th episode of Let's Do Lunch, the Business of Streaming. So we really hope you will join us for that. And Helen will pop a link to sign up for that next webinar on October the 19th into the chat window. Ned, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you to all the panelists today. I thought it was a fantastic conversation once again, and we'll be looking forward to October 6th and talking about churn.
19th.
Oh, 19th. Okay.
19th.
October 19th on the churn segment. So for tomorrow's show, folks, we have the Chief Revenue Officer, Jamie Eldon from Shutterstock on the show, noon Pacific. We'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.